Section 100 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia as the narrator.
Nemo as the rector.
Eva Davis as the curate.
Thomas Peter as the first parishioner.
Todd as the second parishioner.
And Sarah Hale as the third parishioner.
The World's Story, Volume 1, China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific, edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 100 Ribs and Skin, by Unknown. Between the classical dramas in meter, it is the custom of the Japanese to introduce a little prose comedy, like the following. The Editor. Dramatis Personae: the rector of a Buddhist temple, his curate, 3 of the parishioners. Scene: the temple.
I am rector of this temple. I have to call my curate to make a communication to him. Curate, are you there? Are you there? Hello?
Here am I. What is your reason for being pleased to call me?
My reason for calling you is just simply this. I, unworthy priest, am already stricken in years, and the duties of the temple service weigh heavily upon me. So, do you please to understand that, from today, I resign this benefice in your favor.
I feel deeply indebted to your reverence, but as I am still deficient in learning, and as, moreover, no time, however late, would seem too late to me, I beg of you to be so kind as to delay this change.
Nothing could please me more than your most charming answer. But you must know that, though retiring from the rectorship, I do not intend to leave the temple. I shall simply take up my abode in the back apartment. So, if there should be any business of any kind, please to let me know.
Well, if it must be so, I will act in accordance with your august desire.
And mind, though it will scarcely be necessary for me to say so, that you do everything in such a manner as to please the parishioners, and make the temple prosperous.
Pray feel no uneasiness on that head. I will do things in such a way as to please the parishioners right well.
Well, then, I retire without further delay. So, if there should be anything you want to ask, come and call me.
Your commands are laid to heart.
And if any parishioner should call, please to let me know.
Your injunction shall be kept in mind. Ha! This is delightful. To think of the joy of his ceding the benefice to me today. Just as I was saying to myself, when will the rector resign in my favour? When will he resign in my favour? The parishioners, when they hear of it, are sure to be charmed, so I mean to manage it in such a way as to give them all satisfaction.
I am a resident in this neighbourhood. I am on my way to a certain place on business, but as it has suddenly begun to threaten rain, I think I will look in at the parish temple and borrow an umbrella. Ah, here it is. Hoy! Admittance!
Oh, there's someone hallooing at the gate. Who is that asking for admittance? Who is that hallooing?
It is I.
Oh, you are indeed welcome.
It is long since I last had the honour of coming to inquire after you, but I trust that the worthy rector and yourself are still in the enjoyment of good health.
Oh, yes, we both continue well. But I must tell you that, moved by some impulse or other, my master has deigned to resign the benefice in my favour. So I pray that you will continue as heretofore to honour our temple with your visits.
That is an auspicious event, and if I have not been before to offer my congratulations, it is because I was not apprised of it. Well, my present reason for calling is just simply this. I am off to-day to a certain place, but as it has suddenly begun to threaten rain, I should feel much obliged if you would kindly condescend to lend me an umbrella."
Certainly, nothing easier. I will have the honor to lend it to you. Please wait here an instant.
"Oh, very many thanks."
Here, then. I will have the honor to lend you this one.
"Oh, I owe you very many thanks."
Please, always tell me if there is anything of any kind that I can do for you.
"Certainly. I will call in your assistance. But now I will be off."
Are you going?
"Yes. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I am much indebted to you."
Thanks for your visit.
"Ah, well, that is all right. I will hasten on."
As he said, I was to let him know if any of the parishioners came. I will go and tell him what has passed. Pray, are you in?
Oh, that is you.
How dull your reverence must be feeling.
No, I am not dull.
Somebody has just been here.
Did he come to worship, or was it that he had business with us?
He came to borrow an umbrella, so I lent him one.
Quite right of you to lend it. But tell me, which umbrella did you lend?
I lent the one that came home new the other day.
What a thoughtless fellow you are! Would anybody ever dream of lending an umbrella like that one, that had not even been once used yet? The case will present itself again. When you do not want to lend it, you can make an excuse.
How would you say?
You should say, "The request with which you honor me is a slight one, but a day or two ago my master went out with it, and meeting with a gust of wind at a place where 4 roads met, the ribs flew off on one side and the skin on another. So we have tied both skin and ribs by the middle, and hung them up to the ceiling. This being so, it would hardly be able to answer your purpose." Something like that, something with an air of truth about it, is what you should say.
Your injunctions shall be kept in mind, and I will make that answer another time. Now I will be going.
Are you off?
Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. What can this mean? Let my master say what he likes. It does seem strange to refuse to lend a thing when you have it by you.
I am a resident in this neighborhood. As I am going on a long journey today, I mean to go to the parish temple and borrow a horse. I will go quickly. Ah, here it is. Hoy! Admittance!
There is someone hallooing at the gate again. Who is that? Asking for admittance? Who is that hallooing?
It is I.
Oh, you are indeed most welcome.
My present reason for calling is just simply this. I am off today on a long journey, and, though it is a bold request to make, I should feel much obliged if you would condescend to lend me a horse.
Nothing could be slighter than the request with which you honor me. But a day or two ago my master went out with it, and meeting with a gust of wind at a place where 4 roads met, the ribs flew off on one side and the skin on another. So we have tied both skin and ribs by the middle and hung them up to the ceiling. This being so, it would hardly be able to answer your purpose.
Why, it is a horse that I am asking for.
Yes, certainly, a horse.
Oh, well, then there is no help for it. I shall be off.
Are you going?
Yes. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks for your visit.
Well, I never. He says things that I cannot in the least make out.
I spoke as my master had instructed me, so doubtless he will be pleased. Pray, are you in?
Oh, that is you. Is it on business that you come?
Somebody has just been here to borrow our horse.
And you lent him, as he fortunately happened to be disengaged?
Oh, no, I did not lend it, but replied in the manner you had taught me.
What? I do not remember saying anything about the horse. What was it you answered?
I said that you had been out with it a day or two ago, and that, meeting with a gust of wind at a place where 4 roads met, the ribs had flown off on one side and the skin on the other, which being the case, it would hardly be able to answer his purpose.
What do you mean? It was if they came to ask for an umbrella that I told you to reply like that. But would anybody ever dream of saying such a thing to a person who should come to borrow a horse? Another time, when you do not want to lend it, you can make a fitting excuse.
How would you say?
You should say, "We lately turned him out to grass, and becoming frolicsome, he dislocated his thigh, and is lying down covered with straw in a corner of the stable. This being so, he will hardly be able to answer your purpose." Something like that, something with an air of truth about it, is what you should say.
Your injunctions shall be kept in mind, and I will make use of them next time.
Be sure you do not say something stupid.
What can this mean? To say a thing because he tells me to say it, and then, forsooth, to get a scolding for it. For all I am now my own master, I see no way out of these perplexities.
I am a resident in this neighborhood, and am on my way to the parish temple, where I have some business. Well, I'll make haste. Ah, here I am. Hoy! Admittance!
There is someone hallooing at the gate again. Who is that asking for admittance? Who is that hallooing?
It is I.
Oh, a hearty welcome to you.
It is long since I last had the honour of coming to inquire after you, but I trust that the worthy rector and yourself are still in the enjoyment of good health.
Oh, yes, we both continue well. But, by the way, my master, moved by some impulse or other, has designed to resign the benefice in my favour, so I pray that you will continue to honour our temple with your visits.
That is an auspicious event, and if I have not been already to offer my congratulations, it is because I was not apprised of it. Tomorrow, being a religious anniversary in my family, I should feel greatly obliged if our worthy rector and yourself would condescend to come to my house.
For myself, I will come, but my master will scarcely be able to do so.
What? Has he any other business on hand?
No, he has no particular business on hand, but we lately turned him out to grass, and becoming frolicsome, he dislocated his thigh, and is lying down, covered with straw, in a corner of the stable. This being so, he will scarcely be able to come.
Why, it is the rector that I'm talking about.
Yes, certainly, the rector.
Well, I am very sorry such a thing should have occurred. At any rate, do you, please, be so kind as to come.
Most certainly, I will come.
Now I'll be off.
Are you going?
Yes, goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks for your visit.
Well, I never. He says things that I cannot in the least make out.
This time, at all events, he will be pleased. Pray, are you in?
Oh, that is you. Is it on business that you come?
Somebody has just been here to ask both your reverence and myself to go to him tomorrow, when there is a religious anniversary in his family. So I said that I would go, but that you would scarcely be able to do so.
What a pity! I should have liked to have gone, as I just happen to be at leisure tomorrow.
Oh, but I said what you had instructed me to say.
I do not remember. What was it, then, that you answered?
I said that we had lately turned you out to grass, and that, becoming frolicsome, you had dislocated your thigh, and were lying down covered with straw in a corner of the stable, so that you would scarcely be able to go.
You really and truly went and said that?
Yes, really and truly.
Well, I never. You are an idiot. Speak as I may over and over again, Nothing seems to be able to make you understand. It was if they came to borrow a horse that I told you to make that answer. The end of all this is that it will never do for you to become rector. Get along with you.
Oh!
Won't you get
Oh,
along?
dear!
Won't you get along?
Dear! Oh, dear!
Won't you
Oh,
get
dear!
along?
Oh, dear! But, reverend sir, for all you are my master, it is an unheard of shame for you to beat me thus, and for all you are the man you are, you cannot be said to have been without your frolics either, that you cannot.
When was I ever frolicsome? If I ever was, out with it, quick! Out with it, quick!
If I were to tell it, you would be put to shame.
I am conscious of nothing that could put me to shame. If anything there be, out with it, quick! Out with it, quick!
Well then, I'll tell it, I will.
Out with it, quick!
Well then.
The curate here whispers a bit of scandal.
Insolent rascal, inventing things that I never did, and bringing shame on your superior. After this, by the god of war with his bow and arrows, I shall not let you escape me.
For all you are my master, I do not intend to let myself get the worst of it.
Fighting.
Has the old fool learnt a lesson? Oh, I am glad. I am glad. I've beat.
Dearie, dearie me! Where is he off to after having put his master in such a plight? Is there nobody there? Catch him! I won't let him escape! I won't let him escape!
End of section 100. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 101 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eva Davis. The World Story, Volume 1, China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 101, How It Would Feel to Be a Shinto God, by Lafcadio Hearn. Of whatever dimension, the temples or shrines of pure Shinto are all built in the same archaic style. The typical shrine is a windowless oblong building of unpainted timber with a very steep overhanging roof. The front is the gable end, and the upper part of the perpetually closed doors is wooden latticework, usually a grating of bars closely set and crossing each other at right angles. In most cases, the structure is raised slightly above the ground on wooden pillars, and the queer peaked facade, with its visor-like apertures and the fantastic projections of beamwork above its gable angle, might remind the European traveller of certain old Gothic forms of dormer. There is no artificial colour. The plain wood soon turns, under the action of rain and sun, to a natural grey, varying according to surface exposure, from the silvery tone of birch bark to the sombre grey of basalt. So shaped and so tinted, the isolated country yashiro may seem less like a work of joinery than a feature of the scenery, a rural form related to nature as closely as rocks and trees, a something that came into existence only as a manifestation of a Hotsuchi no Kami, the earth god, the primeval divinity of the land. Why certain architectural forms produce in the beholder a feeling of weirdness is a question about which I should like to theorize some day. At present, I shall venture only to say that Shinto shrines evoke such a feeling. It grows with familiarity instead of weakening, and a knowledge of popular beliefs is apt to intensify it. We have no English words by which these queer shapes can be sufficiently described, much less any language able to communicate the peculiar impression which they make. Those Shinto terms which we loosely render by the words temple and shrine are really untranslatable. I mean that the Japanese ideas attaching to them cannot be conveyed by translation. The so-called August House of the Kami is not so much a temple, in the classic meaning of the term, as it is a haunted room, a spirit chamber, a ghost house, many of the lesser divinities being veritably ghosts, ghosts of great warriors and heroes and rulers and teachers, who lived and loved and died hundreds or thousands of years ago. I fancy that to the Western mind the word ghost house will convey, better than such terms as shrine and temple, some vague notion of the strange character of the Shinto miya or yashiro, containing in its perpetual dusk nothing more substantial than symbols or tokens, the latter probably of paper. Now the emptiness behind the visored front is more suggestive than anything material could possibly be. And when you remember that millions of people during thousands of years have worshipped their great dead before such yashiro, that a whole race still believes these buildings tenanted by viewless, conscious personalities, you are apt also to reflect how difficult it would be to prove the faith absurd. Nay, in spite of Occidental reluctances, in spite of whatever you may think it expedient to say or not to say at a later time about the experience, you may very likely find yourself for a moment forced into the attitude of respect toward possibilities. Mere cold reasoning will not help you far in the opposite direction. The evidence of the senses counts for little. You know there are ever so many realities which can neither be seen nor heard nor felt, but which exist as forces, tremendous forces. Then again, you cannot mock the conviction of 40 millions of people, while that conviction thrills all about you like the air, while conscious that it is pressing upon your psychical being, just as the atmosphere presses upon your physical being. As for myself, whenever I am alone in the presence of a Shinto shrine, I have the sensation of being haunted, and I cannot help thinking about the possible apperceptions of the haunter. And this tempts me to fancy how I should feel if I myself were a god, dwelling in some old Izumo shrine on the summit of a hill, guarded by stone lions and shadowed by a holy grove. Elfishly small my habitation might be, but never too small, because I should have neither size nor form. I should be only a vibration, a motion invisible as of ether or of magnetism, though able sometimes to shape me a shadow body in the likeness of my former visible self, when I should wish to make apparition. As air to the bird, as water to the fish, so would all substance be permeable to the essence of me. I should pass at will through the walls of my dwelling, to swim in a long gold bath of a sunbeam, to thrill in the heart of a flower, to ride on the neck of a dragonfly. Power above life and power over death would be mine, and the power of self-extension, and the power of self-multiplication, and the power of being in all places at one and the same moment. Simultaneously in 100 homes I should hear myself worshipped. I should inhale the vapor of 100 offerings. Each evening, from my place within 100 household shrines, I should see the holy lights lighted for me in lamplets of red clay and lamplets of brass, the lights of the kami, kindled with purest fire and fed with the purest oil. But in my yashiro upon the hill I should have greatest honor. There betimes I should gather the multitude of myselves together. There should I unify my powers to answer supplication. From the dusk of my ghost house I should look for the coming of sandaled feet, and watch brown supple fingers weaving to my bars the knotted papers which are records of vows, and observe the motion of the lips of my worshippers making prayer. Harai tamai kiome tamai. We have beaten drums, we have lighted fires, yet the land thirsts and the rice fails. Deign out of thy divine pity to give us rain, O Daimyojin. Harai tamai kiome tamai. I am dark, too dark, because I have toiled in the field, because the sun hath looked upon me. Deign thou augustly to make me white, very white, white like the women of the city, O Daimyojin. Harai tamai kiome tamai. For Skamoto Motokichi our son, a soldier of 29, that he may conquer and come back quickly to us, soon, very soon, we humbly supplicate, O Daimyojin. Sometimes a girl would whisper all her heart to me. Maiden of 18 years, I am loved by a youth of 20. He is good, he is true, but poverty is with us, and the path of our love is dark. Aid us with thy great divine pity, Help us that we may become united, O Daimyojin. Then to the bars of my shrine she would hang a thick soft tress of hair, her own hair, glossy and black as the wing of the crow, and bound with a cord of mulberry paper. And in the fragrance of that offering, the simple fragrance of her peasant youth, I, the ghost and god, should find again the feelings of the years when I was man and lover. Mothers would bring their children to my threshold and teach them to revere me, saying, "Bow down before the great bright god, make homage to the Daimyojin." Then I should hear the fresh soft clapping of little hands, and remember that I, the ghost and god, had been a father. Daily I should hear the plash of pure, cool water poured out for me, and the tinkle of thrown coin, and the pattering of dry rice into my wooden box, like a pattering of rain. And I should be refreshed by the spirit of the water, and strengthened by the spirit of the rice. Festivals would be held to honour me. Priests, black coiffed and linen vestured, would bring me offerings of fruits and fish and seaweed and rice cakes and rice wine, masking their faces with sheets of white paper so as not to breathe upon my food. And the Miko, their daughters, fair girls in crimson hakama and robes of snowy white, would come to dance with tinkling of little bells, with waving of silken fans, that I might be gladdened by the bloom of their youth, that I might delight in the charm of their grace. And there would be music of many thousand years ago, weird music of drums and flutes, and songs in a tongue no longer spoken, while the Miko, the darlings of the gods, would poise and pose before me. Whose virgins are these? The virgins who stand like flowers before the deity. They are the virgins of the august deity. The august music, the dancing of the virgins, the deity will be pleased to hear, the deity will rejoice to see. Before the great bright god the virgins dance, the virgins all like flowers newly opened. Votive gifts of many kinds I should be given, painted paper lanterns bearing my sacred name, and towels of diverse colours printed with the number of the years of the giver, and pictures commemorating the fulfilment of prayers for the healing of sickness, the saving of ships, the quenching of fire, the birth of sons. Also my Karajishi, my guardian lions, would be honoured. I should see my pilgrims tying sandals of straw to their necks and to their paws, with prayer to the Karajishi-sama for strength of foot. I should see fine moss like emerald fur growing slowly, slowly upon the backs of those lions. I should see the sprouting of lichens upon their flanks and upon their shoulders, in specklings of dead silver, in patches of dead gold. I should watch through years of generations the gradual sideward sinking of their pedestals undermined by frost and rain, until at last my lions would lose their balance and fall and break their mossy heads off. After which the people would give me new lions of another form, lions of granite or of bronze, with gilded teeth and gilded eyes, and tails like a torment of fire. Between the trunks of the cedars and pines, between the jointed columns of the bamboos, I should observe, season after season, the changes of the colours of the valley, the falling of the snow of winter, and the falling of the snow of cherry flowers, the lilac spread of the miyakobana, the blazing yellow of the natane, the sky blue mirrored and flooded levels, levels dotted with the moon-shaped hats of the toiling people who would love me, and at last the pure and tender green of the growing rice. The myuku birds and the uguisu would fill the shadows of my groves with ripplings and purlings of melody, the bell insects, the crickets, and the 7 marvellous cicadae of summer would make all the wood of my ghost house thrill to their musical storms. Betimes I should enter, like an ecstasy, into the tiny lives of them, to quicken the joy of their clamour, to magnify the sonority of their song. But I can never become a god, for this is the 19th century, and nobody can be really aware of the nature of the sensations of a god, unless there be gods in the flesh. Are there? Perhaps. In very remote districts. 1 or 2. End of section 101. This recording is in the public domain.
Section number 102 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Read for LibriVox.org by Linda Marie Nielsen. Interior of a Japanese Temple. Photograph, page 368. The Buddhist temples of Japan are thus described by Sadakichi Hartmann. It is in detail that the Japanese architect most excels, for if he conceives like a giant, he invariably finishes like a jeweller. Every detail, to the very nails, which are not dull surfaces, but rendered exquisite ornaments, is a work of art. Everywhere we encounter friezes and carvings in relief, representing in quaint color harmonies flowers and birds, or heavenly spirits playing upon flutes and stringed instruments. The pavement is executed in color slabs, and the pillars are gilded from top to bottom. Even the stairs of some temples are fashioned of gold lacquer. Gold is the neutral color of Japanese decoration. Some of the temple interiors are like visions of the 1001 Nights. Imagine a sanctuary where the ceiling is as magnificent as painting, sculpture, lacquer, and precious metals can make it, representing a dark blue sea in which golden dragons are sporting, pierced at intervals by gorgeous columns, gold lacquered and capped with embossed bronze, and where walls and ceilings are reflected, as in a forest pool, in the black floor of polished lacquer. Colossal structures are common enough in Japan. The porch of the great temple of Tojai rests on pillars 100 feet in height by 12 feet in circumference, and this porch simply furnishes access to another porch of equal size, behind which stands the temple itself, of whose size we may form some idea from the fact that within it contains a colossal image of the Buddha, 53 feet in height, with a nimbus surrounding the head 83 feet in diameter. Not less vast are the proportions of the great sanctuary at Nara, where each column, 100 feet in height, consists of a single stem. It is astonishing to learn that these structures, vast in size and splendid in decoration, blazing with gold and colors, as gorgeous now after a lapse of 1,000 years as they were at first, belong to an age compared to whose remoteness the European cathedrals must almost be called modern. End of section 102. This recording is in the public domain. Section 103 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The World Story, Volume 1, China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 103. Tadasuke, the Japanese Solomon, by Walter Denning. Tadasuke lived in the first half of the 18th century. In those days few people besides the officials knew what the laws were, and each judge was practically free to extract evidence, reward, and punish as he thought best. The following stories illustrate the sense of justice and the quickness of wit of Tadasuke, the most famous of these judges. The Editor. An 18th century judge. It happened that a woman who was acting as a servant in the house of a certain baron had a little girl born to her, whom she found it difficult to attend to properly while in service, so she put it out to nurse in a neighbouring village, and paid a fixed sum a month for her maintenance. When the child reached the age of 10, the mother, having finished her term of service, left the baron's mansion. Being now her own mistress, and naturally wishing to have her child with her, she informed the woman who was taking charge of it of her wish. The woman was reluctant to part with the child. She was a very intelligent little girl, and the foster mother thought that she might get some money by hiring her out to work, so she informed the mother that she did not wish to part with her. This of course soon led to a quarrel. The disputants went to law about it, and the case came up before Tadasuke. The woman to whom the child had been entrusted actually asserted that it was her own offspring, and that the child's mother had no right to it whatever. Tadasuke saw at once that the dispute was one which could be settled in no ordinary way, so he commanded the two women to place the child between them, and one to take hold of its right hand and the other of its left, and each to pull with all her might. "The one who conquers," said he, "shall be declared the mother of the child." The real mother disliked immensely this mode of settling the dispute. Therefore, though she took hold of the child's hand as she was bidden, fearing that the girl would be hurt by pulling violent on both sides, she slackened her hold as soon as the foster mother began to pull, and allowed the latter to get an easy victory. "There!" said the foster mother, "the child you see is mine." Then Tadasuke with a loud voice interposed: "You are a deceiver. The real mother of the child, fearing that it would be hurt by the dragging, intentionally relaxed her grasp on its hand. But you, who are in no way attached to the child by nature, thought only of overcoming your adversary, and cared nothing for the feelings of the girl." Tadasuke then commanded the foster mother to be bound. She, thinking that she would be tortured if she remained silent, immediately confessed that she had been attempting to deceive them, and asked for pardon. It is on account of this story that Tadasuke has been called the Japanese Solomon. Tadasuke and the Smell of Pickles. When Tadasuke was one of the mayors of Edo, a man called Hachibei kept a shop in one of the back streets, where he sold all kinds of old metal pots. Hachibei, by dint of much effort, had realized the sum of 50 ryo by his trade. Not knowing any better place in which to put this money, he concealed it in his pickle jar. He was living in what is called a nagaya, which consists of one long building divided up into different parts to suit the convenience of the poor tenants who inhabit it. As a large number of people were residing in this building, some soon discovered that the money was concealed in the pickle jar, and the discovery was no sooner made than the money was stolen. One day when Hachibei went to see whether his money was all right, what was his astonishment to find it gone! The poor man was in the greatest distress. This blow seemed to break his heart. He went to the owner of the building and told him what had happened. The landlord was very sorry, but said he did not know what to do. He advised Hachibei to have another look for the money, as it might be in the jar after all. Hachibei said that further search would be useless, and that he thought the matter ought to be carried into court at once. "Of course the matter should be reported," said the landlord, "but how can it be carried into court if I do not know? What case can be made out of it? Whom are you going to accuse?" Hachibei pleaded hard, saying that if this money were not recovered he would not know how to go on with his business. So, to satisfy him, the landlord requested Tadasuke to institute an inquiry into the matter. After hearing the case, Tadasuke said to Hachibei: "Your idea of putting the money into the pickle jar was a good one, and had you not kept going to the jar to see it was safe, doubtless no one would have discovered it was there. But your constantly going to the jar created suspicion and led to its being stolen. Have you any remembrance of anybody seeing you take it out of the jar?" "I have no remembrance of any one seeing me do it," replied Hachibei, "but I think that the person who stole it must be someone who resides in the same building with me, for it is not likely that a stranger would look for anything valuable in a pickle jar." "There you are right," said the magistrate, "and it is very annoying that a person like yourself, who has after much trouble succeeded in making 50 ryo, should lose it in this way." Here the landlord stepped forward and said: "If you please, my lord, this man is in a very distressed state, owing to the loss of his money. He talks about killing himself. What to do with him I do not know. I humbly and respectfully beg that your Excellency will do him the favour of looking into the matter." "You may go for the present. I shall send for you again," replied Tadasuke. 2 or 3 days later a letter reached Hachibei commanding him to appear before Tadasuke. It was also added that every person in the Nagaya in which Hachibei lived, man, woman, or child, was to appear at court. On the day appointed, the people who occupied the same building, one and all, made their appearance. Tadasuke opened the inquiry by stating what had occurred. "Hachibei," said he, "a seller of old metal, some little time ago took some money which belonged to him, and, putting it into a linen bag, concealed it in a pickle jar. This money has been removed from the jar by some one other. Although people might be inclined to call this a theft, I have little doubt that its removal was not a premeditated act, but that somebody who was going to the pickle jar came across the money accidentally, and suddenly, before he knew what it was about, was overcome by a desire to carry it off. Very likely the man or woman who took it went to the jar intending to take a few pickles, and seeing the money carried it off. Anyhow, the person who took the money must have put his or her hand into the pickle jar, and doubtless the smell of pickles, associated as it is in this case with the removal of the money, will still remain on that person's hand. By going round to each of you and smelling your hands, then I shall discover who has taken the money. But before I do this, there is one thing I wish to say, which is this: if the person who has taken the money waits till I come and discover him or her, that person's crime will be considered to be a great one; but if the guilty party comes forward, and confesses at once what he or she has done, I shall deal leniently with that person." Here Tadasuke put on a severe and somewhat angry face, and prepared to rise. Just at this juncture a man in one of the back seats smelt his fingers. whereupon Tadasuke exclaimed: "How wonderful it is that a man who is conscious of having done wrong should carry the smell of his misdemeanor in his fingers! Though some days have elapsed since the deed which defiled the heart was perpetrated, that smell evidently adheres to the hand of him who committed it. There is no need to inquire into the matter any further." Here, pointing to the man who had smelt his fingers, "You," said the magistrate, "have taken the money." The man, feeling that after his unconscious act had revealed the truth, it was useless to seek to hide it any longer, confessed that he was the offender, and begged for forgiveness. Tadasuke and the Woman in the Box. It happened once that a robber who would not confess his guilt was brought before Tadasuke. He was asked to try and devise some means of inducing him to confess. Tadasuke had a large box brought into the court house, and gave orders that the thief's wife should be placed in the box before his eyes. Then he had the box removed to an adjoining room, and caused an officer to be put into it in the wife's stead. When the arrangements were complete, the box was again brought into the court house, and Tadasuke addressed the robber as follows: "As you refuse without punishment of some sort to confess the crime that we are sure you have committed, instead of administering to you the usual torture, I decree that you carry your wife once around the town." The man put the box on his back and set off around the town. When he reached an unfrequented spot, where he thought that no one would hear him, he exclaimed: "I say, wife, crime is a thing that ought not to be committed. What trouble it brings us into!" Here the officer sprang out of the box, and uttering the words "Go, Joy," as is usual in the case of an arrest, took the man into custody. Having thus committed himself, the thief was no longer able to conceal his crime. Tadasuke and the Man whose Thumbs were Tied. A woman named Chiko lent 300 ryo to one Hachirobei. He denied that he had borrowed the money, and in her indignation she set fire to his house. The case came before Tadasuke. The Editor. As Hachirobei obstinately refused to confess his guilt, Tadasuke addressed him as follows: "When I was a child we used to have a charm against forgetfulness. It consisted in tying up the thumbs with paper, which infallibly brought the matter to one's recollection. Practise that charm upon Hachirobei." So they took his right and left thumbs, placing them one on the top of the other, wrapped paper round them, and put on the official seal; after which his lordship said: "Now, Hachirobei, try hard to recollect, and I warn you that if you tear the paper in the very least you will be committed to jail. You will be examined every other day, and mind you do not fail to appear." Thereupon both parties were dismissed. My lord had quickly seen to the bottom of Hachirobei's heart, divining that, though not a particularly wicked man, he had been led by greed to refuse payment of the woman's money. The thumb tying which ensued prevented Hachirobei from sleeping at night and from feeding himself at meal times; above all, it interfered with his taking pen in hand to balance his accounts, and made everything more uncomfortable for him that can be imagined. He was really at his wits' end when, after the lapse of 7 or 8 days, he was again summoned to attend and was addressed as follows: "How goes it, Hachirobei? Has the loan of the 300 ryo come to your recollection? No doubt you never repaid it, though you thought you had. Seeing that it was that money that led Chiko to commit arson, she cannot be executed until the matter is cleared up. So make haste with your pondering." Hachirobei could endure no longer. "My lord," said he, "careful investigation of my ledgers has brought to light an entry of borrowed 300 ryo, and though no name is attached, I make no doubt that the item referred to is the sum borrowed from Chiko." "Then you admit that you borrowed it from Chiko?" inquired the judge. "Yes, my lord, with all due respect, I admit it." "You borrowed the 300 ryo 7 years ago, so the sum will now amount to over 500 ryo, allowing interest at the rate of 3 ryo a month. You must refund the whole of this. However, as it may inconvenience you to produce the entire sum at once, you shall pay it back at the rate of 20 ryo a year in 4 installments of 5 ryo each." Having thus charged Hachirobei, his lordship was pleased to inquire Chiko's age, and on being informed she was 63, he said: "Well, you will receive the 500 ryo, principal and interest, in the manner I have just directed Hachirobei, year by year. When the whole debt shall have been settled, you will be executed." To the proprietor of the house where she lived, he said: "Give notice at once if Chiko dies, but no coroner need be sent for." This sentence brought the whole matter to a close. The reasons underlying it were that at the rate of 20 ryo a year, it would take 25 years for the whole sum of 500 ryo to be received back by Chiko, who was then already 63 years of age, while, furthermore, the order simply to report her death without holding a coroner's inquest was dictated by the desire to save her from the capital punishment due to arson. The result of the judgment was to impress not only the policemen and constables, but the whole city with admiration for my lord's mercy and wisdom, and it became very famous. End of section 103. This recording is in the public domain. Section number 104 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The World Story, Volume 1. China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 104. The Sword of Japan by Sir Edwin Arnold. A great shogun of Japan, the famous Ieyasu, left it written in his testament that the girded sword is the life of the samurai. The sword was, indeed, even more than this in ancient Japan. It became the central point in the morals and customs of the land, the badge of honor and the token of chivalry, a special and sacred weapon around which grew up the grave, punctilious manners of the lords and knights of Dai Nippon, whose politeness, exquisite but rigid as the steel they bore, had to be imitated, and was imitated by the lesser people. The civilization of country always crystallizes round a few fundamental habits of that country. The manners and morals of Japan may all be traced to the sword, the teacup, and the paper house. The first has made the people serious, fearless, punctilious in mutual demeanor; the second has created their identical habits, the sobriety and sociability; while those perfectly transparent abodes of paper and panel, common throughout Japan, where no secrets are hid, have forced upon them a Greek simplicity of domestic behaviour, with a modesty, naturalness, and absence of Malvaise honte, unparalleled elsewhere. The sword has been now forever laid aside in public by the gentlemen of Japan, obeying in this, with wonderful good sense, a sudden and difficult edict; but the signs of its ancient cult linger deep to this hour in the minds and ways of the people, and it may be worth while to speak a little of the bygone importance of the Japanese sword. The sword maker who forged the finer blades for the samurai and daimyo, the barons and knights, was no mere blacksmith. He ranked, indeed, first of all craftsmen in the land, and was often appointed lord or vice lord of a province. He did not enter on his grave duties lightly. When he had a blade to make for a great Japanese gentleman, the katana abstained for a whole week from all animal food and strong drink. He slept alone, and poured cold water every morning over his head. When the forge was ready, and no woman might so much as enter its precincts, and when the steel bars were duly selected, he repaired to the temple and prayed there devoutly. Then he came back to his anvil and furnace, and hung above them the consecrated straw rope shimi nawa, and the clippings of paper gohei, which kept away evil spirits. He put on the dress of a court noble, with the eboshi and kamishimo, tying back his long sleeves with a silk cord. Only after many ceremonies, when the five elements fire, water, wood, metal, and earth were well constellated, would that pious artisan take his hammer in hand. The blade was beaten out of steel alone, muku gete, the pure make, or of steel blended with iron. Great heed was taken to have good and well smelted material. Each time, before the smith placed his bar in the bed of glowing charcoal, which an apprentice blew to white heat, he coated it with a paste of clay and straw ashes, so as not to burn the naked metal, and never touched it with the hand, hot or cold, since sweat would spoil the weld, and leave a blur on the steel. When he had beaten out his bar 8 inches long, 2½ inches wide, and 3/4 of an inch thick, he bent it midway, beat it out again to the same dimensions, thus folding and rehammering it some 15 or 20 times. As the original bar was in 4 flakes, Dr. Lyman, in his admirable treatise on the subject, calculates that at the 15th hammering there would be 131,072 layers, increased by 5 following bendings to 4,194,304 layers. This careful repetition gave the metal a texture like ivory or satin wood. They had names for the different watering so produced, as bean grain, pear grain, pine bark grain, and vein grain. Afterwards the blade was forged down to its full length. the imperfect ends cut off, the point drawn out, and the tang fitted on, upon which came the tempering. But these last processes were very serious, and the sword forger sat alone, and solemnly sang to himself while he gave to the weapon its final fashionings. They say that the difference between the swords of Masamune and of Muramasa, two famous craftsmen, was due to their singing. A Masamune blade brought victory and luck everywhere. A Muramasa sword was always leading its owner into quarrels, though it carried him through them well, and it would cause accidents, and cut the fingers of friendly folks inspecting it, being never willing to go back to its scabbard without drinking blood. The real reason was, so runs the legend, that Muramasa, while he sat at his work in the forge, was ever singing a song which had the chorus of Tenka Tyran, Tenka Tyran, which means trouble in the world, trouble in the world, where Masamune, the gentle and lucky sword maker, always chanted while he worked Tenka Teke Teke, which signifies peace be on earth, peace. Japanese people of the old days firmly believed that both the kindly words and the unkindly got somehow welded into the very spirit of the steel, so that Masamune's blades prevented quarrels or brought to their wielders a quick victory, while Muramasa had in them a lurking instinct for doing mischief, a sort of itch to hurt and wound. All sorts of tales were told to illustrate this. There was a splendid sword of Muramasa which had killed by Harari four of its possessors in succession. Once, too, when the shogun was handling a spearhead embedded in a helmet of one of his warriors, the point wounded his august hand. "See quickly," he said, "what is the mark upon this accursed iron, for it must be Muramasa's." And when they came to look at the maker's mark, it was indeed a spearhead from the grim sword makers, who had chanted the thirst for blood into all his yari and katana. Some of the very famous sword forgers would never write their names or make any sign at all upon their productions. "It is enough to try a blade of mine," said Toshiro Moshimitsu. "It will tell you of itself who made it." Most of the inferior craftsmen engraved dragons, gods, and flowers upon their blades, but the best work does not bear such ornaments, which might hide an imperfection in the metal. All, however, except such men as Toshiro and Masamune, would cut into the tang the name and date of the sword and the owner's and maker's name. Swords had appellations, and might be christened with such titles as Osoraku, the Terrible, or Hiru, the Bloodsucker. On a long sword noted by Dr. Lyman, the inscription ran: Mot Shishibui, Mot Iku Bishi. Defend yourself with me, die with me. But when the blade had been forged and shaped, whether it was the straight tsuguri or the tachi and katana carved into the lines of the falcon's wing or the cormorant's neck, it had to be very carefully and skilfully tempered. The Japanese swordsmiths effected at one operation what European craftsmen do in two, namely, the high annealing of the edge and the low tempering of the body of the blade. They covered it with sabi doro, a paste of red earth and charcoal, and then, before this hardened, they drew the paste away from a narrow streak along the edge, afterwards putting it into the fiercest part of the fire. Very heedfully did the smith move the precious sword up and down in the pine coals till he saw the proper color come near the tang, which would be in a few minutes. Then it was plunged in water of a certain temperature, which thing in itself was a great secret. Cata, the one-handed, a renowned swordsmith, brought the knowledge of that precious mystery dear. His master taught him everything else except this matter of the right heat of the tempering bath. So, watching his opportunity, he broke into the forge one day, and plunged his hand into the water just as the master was dipping a reddened blade into it. The master smote the audacious member off there and then with the unfinished sword, but Katake knew his last trade secret. The fire, which burned the barred edge violet, left the mane or body of the blade blue or straw color, and being plunged into the water, the sudden chill turned the former very hard, but brittle, making the latter tough, elastic, and mild. The edge so obtained was called yakiba, baked leaf, but there must not be too much breadth of it, as it would necessarily be brittle. Then was the cold blade carefully cleaned and rough ground, and at this stage the smith could know whether his work must be wasted or not. If the smallest fault manifested itself, the true craftsman flung the failure aside. The false one cut a dragon or Sanskrit letter or two over the blemish. The grooves were now chiselled into the sword, especially the chi nagashi, or blood channel, which in the case of spearheads would be afterwards filled up with vermilion lacquer. A hole was drilled in the tang to receive the mekugi, or bamboo peg holding the handle on, and then followed the real and final grinding. This was performed by a special handcraftsman, holding the blade horizontally, wrapped in cloths, and with a small part only bare, he rubbed it up and down upon whetstones of varying grit, finishing upon a 15th stone of very fine grain, and afterwards polishing with stone powder and oil. It would be at this stage that the beauty and value of the sword came forth. There used to be very many Japanese gentlemen, and even to day there are some, who could tell instantly, upon inspection, by the look of a blade in this stage, who had wrought it. Official personages existed who gave governmental certificates of blades, written on special paper and stamped. The boundary between the hard shop whitish edge and the grey blue of the back must not be harsh. It must be clouded by nioi, misty spots and flecks, not regular like drop marks, but fleecy and broken apart like clouds. In good steel, where the clay covering had slightly come away, there would appear tobi yaki, flying burns, isolated specks of soft white. The visible grain would look as though the steel were water and it were rippling. Where the tempering had been perfect, there would come little points of bright silver along the edge, called ni, only to be seen by the educated eye. Masamune's swords were very full of such. It must be an excellent blade if, inside and underneath, as it were, the dark body of it, there flickered the utsuri, the reflection, a glimmer along the dividing line of edge and breast, faintly prismatic, and resembling the mist around the moon. Only consummate judge could note and estimate the chiki, small films of white, and azuma, or lightning flashes, fine shining lines in the nioi, the sunagashi, resembling specks of sand in a row, and the uchi yoke, or narrow forge marks. The blade which combined these virtues was fit to sit in the girdle of a daimyo, and would be worth from 200 to 300 pounds, 12 to 1500 of the old yen. Such a sword was often mounted very splendidly indeed, the finest artists lavishing their skill upon the scabbard, tuska, the mi nut, or studs upon the handle, and above all on the tsuba, or hilt, which was often enriched with lovely work in gold, silver, and bronze. The scabbard was generally of magnolia wood, and ended in a richly adorned kajori, or ferrule. It held, at its upper end, two small daggers or skewers, with pretty handles called kogai. These were used in thick of fight to stick through the ear of a slain enemy, as sort of visiting card. With such a weapon you could cut through 5 sheets of copper and not notch the steel, and the edge put on it might be so fine that if you held it in a river's current a stalk of grass floating down would divide upon contact with it. Masume's blades could sever a bar of iron, or cut a falling hair in two. Muramasa's would slice bronze armor like a melon. The point was not much used, but Ieyasu once, for trial, put a katana of Yoshimitsu's clean through the iron mortar of his physician. Immense punctilio attached to the wearing, the carriage, and the etiquettes of these precious weapons. The higher born you were, the more you might stick up the hilts of your two swords, but soldiers of lesser degree wore them horizontally. Dr. Lyman says correctly, "To draw a sword from its scabbard without begging leave of the others present was not thought polite. To clash the scabbard of your sword against another was a great rudeness. To turn the sword or the scabbard, as if about to draw, was tantamount to a challenge, and to lay your weapon on the floor and kick the guard towards another was an intolerable insult, that generally resulted in a combat to the death." Buffon says that "the rules of observances connected with the wearing of the long and short sword, or the single sword, were very minute, but have fallen into disuse." In former days the most trivial breach of these elaborate observances was often the cause of murderous brawls and dreadful reprisals. To express a wish to see a sword was not usual, unless when a blade of great value was in question, and then a request to be shown it would be a compliment appreciated by the happy possessor. The sword would then be handed with the back towards the guest, the edge turned towards the owner, and the hilt to the left, the guest wrapping the hilt either in the little silk napkin always carried by gentlemen in their girdle books, or in a sheet of clean paper. The weapon was drawn from the scabbard and admired inch by inch, but not to the full length, unless the owner pressed his guest to do so, and then, with much apology, the sword was entirely drawn and held away from the other persons present. After being admired, it would, if apparently necessary, be carefully wiped with a special cloth, sheathed, and returned to the owner as before. A guest, on entering a friend's house, if the host was an older man or of higher rank, would take off his longer sword and either lay it down at the entrance or hand it to the servant who admitted him, who would thereupon place it on the sword rack in the position of honor in the apartment. If on somewhat familiar or equal terms with the host, the guest might carry the long sword into the house, but detached with its scabbard from the belt, and lay it on the floor at his right hand, where it could not be drawn. The shorter sword was retained in the girdle, but in a prolonged visit both host and guest laid that also aside. These high manners of the steel bred that Japanese courtliness and chivalry which have survived it. The cult of the katana is now forever at an end in Dai Nippon. The samurai and lords of the land have laid aside their proudly cherished weapons, and go abroad as peacefully as the Akindo, the merchant. Yet there are fine swordsmen still to be found among the quietest of the emperor's senators and lieges, and I have myself seen wonderful things done by some of them with ancient blades. Moreover, the measured speech, the deep and heedful reverence, the silent dignity, the instincts of manhood which clustered round the steel, are still characteristic of the race, and the swords, though no longer worn, are proudly and carefully preserved in many a mansion, castle, and temple. Thucydides says that the nation which carries iron is barbarous, and under that remark the United States, where almost everybody seems to possess and carry a revolver, would stand condemned; but Japan, by a wonderful effort of abnegation on the part of her upper classes, altogether laid aside, 20 years ago, the old and perilous habit of going abroad with a girdle full of swords and daggers. It was a noble submission to new ideas. Yet to this day a Japanese gentleman raises your sword to his forehead and bows deeply before he examines it. Nor will he uncover a single inch of the shining and sacred steel without gravely obtaining your permission and that of the company present. End of section 104. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 105 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Read for LibriVox.org by Sarah Hale. Japan, Part 3. Some Curious Customs. Historical Note. The remarkable rise of Japan to the position of a great world power is attributable to 5 qualities that are united in her people: frugality, endurance, obedience, altruism, and a genius for detail. Among the most noticeable traits of the Japanese character are gaiety, politeness, and a serenity that is proof against the misfortunes of ordinary life. The samurai, the knight of old Japan, learned first of all that he must never display emotion. Pain or pleasure must find him equally unperturbed, and if it was impossible for him to live with honor, he must perform harakiri, suicide by falling upon a sword, with placid mien. End of section 105. This recording is in the public domain.
Section 106 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The World's Story, Volume 1, China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Ava March Tappan. Section 106. A Japanese Dinner Party by Sir Edwin Arnold. A banquet here, properly arranged, served, and located, furnishes, in my humble judgment, as graceful and delightful a meal as can be shared in all the world, and casts into the shade the classic memories of the triclinia of ancient times, the too solid and lavish dishes of Turkey and Syria, the cloying sweetmeats of an Indian burra khana, and even in many respects the festal triumphs of a Parisian or London cordon bleu. The act of eating is, in truth, somewhat gross and of the animal, albeit decidedly necessary. Japanese taste and fancy have, however, known how to elevate the somewhat humiliating daily need from a process of mere nourishment into a fine art and a delicate divertisement, where every sense is in turn softly pleased and soothed, and food and drink fall in like pleasant interludes without ever assuming the chief importance of the occasion. None the less, you may fare abundantly, luxuriously, and to repletion, if you will, from the Japanese menu. But the fare is all the more agreeable and digestible because you eat what you like, when you like, as you like, and in what order you like, during these 3 or 4 placid hours converted into a dream of pleasure by accomplished dancing and singing, and by the most perfect and most charming service. It was our good fortune lately to be invited to a typical native dinner at the Japanese Club in this capital, of which I will offer a sketch in the very lightest outline. The club, situated in the heart of the city, is a building entirely of the indigenous style as to design and decoration, frequented chiefly by the higher officials and noblemen of Tokyo. Imagine, if you can, endless platforms of polished wood, stairway apartment ladders of shining cedar and pine, apartment after apartment carpeted with spotless matting and walled by the delicate joinery of the shoji. Everywhere a scrupulous neatness, an exquisite elegance, a dainty aesthetic reserve, nothing too much anywhere of ornament. Except the faultless carpentry of the framework and the tender color of the walls and paneled ceilings, you will see only a stork or two in silk embroidery here, a dream in sepia of Fujisan there, a purple chrysanthemum plant yonder in its pot of green and gray porcelain, and the snow-white floors with their little square cushions. Our dinner was one of about 20 cushions, and we were received at the entrance by about as many musumes, the servants of the establishment, having their okusama at their head, who upon our approach prostrate themselves on the outer edge of the matted hall, uttering musical little murmurs of welcome and honor. Our footgear is laid aside below the dark polished margin of the hall, and we step upon the soft yielding tatamis, and are each then led by the hand of some graceful, small, tripping musume to the broad ladder, up which we must ascend to the dining-room, enlarged for the occasion by the simple method of running back the shutters of papered framework. The guests comprise European ladies as well as gentlemen, and all are in their stocking feet, for the loveliest satin slipper ever worn could not venture to pass from the street pavement to these immaculate mats. While you chat with friends, you turn suddenly to find one of the damsels in the flowered kimono and the dazzling obi kneeling at your feet with a cup of pale tea in her tiny hands. Each guest receives this preliminary attention. Then the square cushions are ranged round 3 sides of the room, and we tuck our legs under us, those at least who can manage it, and sit on our heels, the guest of honor occupying the center position at the top. To each convive then enters a pretty, bright, well-dressed Japanese waitress with hair decked to the nines, stuck full of flowers and jeweled pins and shining like polished black marble. She never speaks or settles to any serious duty of the entertainment without falling on her little knees, smoothing her skirt over them, and knocking her nice little flat nose on the floor, and will either demurely watch you use your hashi, your chopsticks, in respectful silence, or prettily converse, and even offer her advice as to the most succulent morsels of the feast, and the best order in which to do them justice. Before each guest is first placed a cake of sugared confectionery and some gaily colored leaf biscuits with a tiny transparent cup of hot tea. Then comes the first honorable table, a small lacquered tray with lacquered bowls upon it, containing a covered basin of tsuyu soup, the honorable dew, a little pot of soy, a gilded platter with various sweet and aromatic condiments upon it, and some wonderful vegetables environing some fairy cutlets of salmon. You disengage your chopsticks from their silken sheath and prepare for action. Nor is it so very difficult to wield those simple knives and forks of Eastern Asia, if once the secret of the guiding fingers between them be learned. Otherwise, you will drop the very first mouthful from the soup bowl upon your shirt front, to the gentle but never satirical laughter of your musume. Amid the talk which buzzes around, you will have inquired of her already in Japanese, "What is your honorable name?" and "How many are your honorable years?" And she will have informed you that she is Ohoshi, Oshika, Otsubaki. That is to say, Miss Star, Miss Camellia, or Miss Antelope, and that she was 18 years of age, or otherwise, on her last birthday. Respectfully, you consult Oshika-san as to what you should do with the fragrant and appetizing museum of delicacies before you. She counsels you to seize the tiny lump of yellow condiment with your chopsticks, to drop it in the soy and stir it up and flavor therewith the pink flakes of salmon, and you get on very famously, watched by her almond eyes with the warmest personal interest. Now and again she shuffles forward on her small knees to fill your sake cup, or to rearrange the confusion into which your little bowls and platters have somehow fallen, always with a consummate grace, modesty, and good breeding. And now, while you were talking with your neighbor, she has glided off and reappeared with another tray, on which is disclosed a yet more miscellaneous second service. Her brown, tiny, well-formed hands insinuate deftly within reach as you kneel in your cushion. Numerous saucers clustered round a fresh red lacquered basin of vegetable soup, wherein swim unknown but attractive comestibles. The combinations of these are startling if you venture upon questioning the delighted Oshika-san, but you must be possessed of a courageous appetite, or you will subsequently disappoint the just expectations of Miss Antelope. Here are shrimps, it seems, pickled with anzu, apricots, snipe subtly laid in beds of colored rice and curry, chestnuts, wild goose with radish cakes, and hare, usagi, seasoned with preserved cherries, amid little squares of perfumed almond paste and biscuits of persimmon. The piece de resistance is a pretty slab of fluted glass, whereupon repose artistic fragments of fish, mostly raw, so grouped that the hues and outlines of the collection charm like a watercolor drawing. You play with your chopstick points among shreds of taco, the cuttlefish, kani, crab paste, saba, and hirami, resembling our mackerel and soles, and are led by the earnest advice of your kneeling musume to try perhaps the uncooked trout yamami. With the condiments her little fingers have mixed, It is so good that you cease, presently, to feel like a voracious seal, and wonder if it be not wrong, after all, to boil and fry anything. Environed with all these in tiny dishes, and lightly fluttering from one to another, with no bread or biscuit, it is true, but the warm, strong sake to wash it all down, for the glossy-haired musume keeps a little flask at her side for your especial use, you are beginning at last to be conscious of having dined extraordinarily well, and also, perchance, of pins and needles in your legs. So you say, Moyuroshi, it is enough, and now the service relapse a little for music and dancing. The shoji are pushed back at the far end of the room, and 3 musicians are discovered playing the samisen, the 13-stringed koto, and a kind of violin. Before them sit the best geishas from Kyoto, and we are pleasantly weaned from our desultory dinner by a dramatic pas de deux founded on the subjoined ideas. Hidari Jingoro was one of the most celebrated woodcarvers of Japan. He flourished in the early part of the 17th century. Specimens of his work are to be seen in the great temples of Nikko and in Kyoto. The tradition represented in this dance is the Japanese Pygmalion and Galatia. Hidari Jingoro, having employed all the resources of his art to carve the image of a Kyoto beauty, to whom he is said to have been attached, succeeds so admirably that one day he suddenly finds the figure endowed with life and movement. But although the girl is there in the flesh, her soul is the soul of Jingoro. She thinks with his thoughts and moves with his movements. Jingoro would fain alter this, and convert the wooden image into Umigai herself, as well as in the mind as in appearance. He considers that the object upon which all the feminine instincts of the fair sex are concentrated is a mirror. Accordingly, he places a mirror in the girl's hand, and she, seeing her own face, immediately becomes Umigai, and ceases to be a female replica of Jingoro. Deprived of the mirror, however, she loses individuality, and is once more a living automaton. The little Musumes withdraw to the side walls that we may better watch every step. Absolutely impossible it is to describe with how much eloquence of pace and gesture the little girl in gold and blue dances and glances round the motionless girl in gold and scarlet until she has charmed that black-eyed statue into life. And then the rapture, the illusion, the disillusion, the anguish of watching the imitativeness of that brown Galatia, the joy when the mirror renders her individual, the grief when without it she relapses into a living shadow of her dark-skinned Pygmalion, the artistic graces developed and the dainty passages of emotion tripped to the simple but passionate music, with the gilded silken kimono floating and fluttering about those small bare feet, those slender banded knees. The dance was a real piece of choreographic genius, and the applause sincere when the sculptor and his lovely image bent themselves to the earth and demurely resumed their cushions. Meantime, obeying Japanese etiquette, each guest in turn comes to the guest of honor, asks leave to drink from his sake cup, and obtaining it, raises the vessel to his forehead, drinks, rinses it from the water bowl, and fills it for his friend. When this is done, the guest of honor must go round and pledge his associates in the same way, while the 3 sides of the convivial square now for a time break up into chatty groups, wherein the musumes mingle like living flowers scattered about. But dinner is not nearly finished yet. Before each cushion there is again laid a lacquered tray, none of the others being yet removed, and this contains the choicest fish which can be procured, a whole one, with his tail curled up in a garland of flower buds, together with cakes, scented spice balls, and sugar sticks, which you are to eat if you can. If not able to cope with these new dainties, they will be put into pretty boxes and deposited in your carriage or jinriksha. Indeed, it is necessary to be careful in leaving one of these entertainments, or you may sit on a boiled mullet or stuffed woodcock or some cream tartlets. While we dally with the third service, the geishas dance again and again, the last performance being full of comic grace. It was called the Arashiyama. Arashiyama is one of the most celebrated spots in Kyoto. Its cherry blossoms in spring and its maples in autumn attract thousands of visitors. Among the cherry trees there was a little theater called Mibudo, where wordless plays used to be acted when the flowers were in full bloom. Here the palace ladies were in the habit of coming every season, and their attendants enjoyed a picnic and extemporized plays for the ladies' amusement. The dance represented such a picnic. During the carouse, a female enters, beautifully dressed, but wearing the mask of okami, the colloquial term for a particularly fat, homely wench. The convives, persuaded that this disguise is intended to conceal uncommon charms, press her to drink, and she, after receiving their attentions, suddenly removes her mask, exhibiting the face, not of a lovely damsel, but of the veritable Okami herself, the patron goddess of plain women. With wonderful spirit and charm, the gay little danseuses performed this comedy, ending our long but never tedious dinner of 5 hours with a special figure called Sentakoya, or the Washerman's Trio. After this, each musume led her guest by the hand to the hall. Shoes were resumed, carriages entered, and honorable exits made, in a dazzling forest tempest of sayоnaras, farewell, and mata irashais, come soon again. End of section 106.
Section number 107 of China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by April 6090, California, United States of America. The World Story, Volume 1, China, Japan, and the Islands of the Pacific. Edited by Eva March Tappan. Section 107, How Japanese Ladies Go Shopping. By Alice M. Bacon. There are in Japan a few great merchants whose word may be trusted, and whose obligations will be fulfilled with absolute honesty. But a large part of the buying and selling is still in the hands of mercantile freebooters, who will take an advantage wherever it is possible to get one, in whose morality honesty has no place, and who have not yet discovered the efficacy of that virtue simply as a matter of policy. Their trade, conducted in a small way upon small means, is more of the nature of a game, in which one person is the winner and the other the loser, than a fair exchange, in which both parties obtain what they want. It is the medieval, not the modern idea of business, that is still held among Japanese merchants. With them, trade is a warfare between buyer and seller, in which every man must take all possible advantage for himself, and it is the lookout of the other party if he is cheated. In Tokyo, the greatest and most modernized of the cities of the empire, the shops are not the large city stores that one sees in European and American cities, but little open-fronted rooms, on the edge of which one sits to make one's purchases, while the proprietor smiles, and bows and dickers, setting his price by the style of his customer's dress, or her apparent ignorance of the value of the desired article. Some few large dry goods stores there are, where prices are set and dickering is unnecessary, and in the kwankoba or bazaars one may buy almost anything needed by Japanese of all classes. from house furnishings to foreign hats, at prices plainly marked upon them, and from which there is no variation, but one's impression of the state of trade in Japan is, that it is still in a very primitive and undeveloped condition, and is surprisingly behind the other parts of Japanese civilization. The shopping of the ladies of the large yashikis and of wealthy families is done mostly in the home, for all the stores are willing at any time, on receiving an order, to send up a clerk with a bale of crepes, silks, and cottons tied to his back, and frequently towering high above his head as he walks, making him look like the proverbial ant with a grain of wheat. He sets his great bundle carefully down on the floor, opens the enormous furoshiki, or bundle handkerchief, in which it is enveloped, and takes out roll after roll of silk or chintz, neatly done up in paper or yellow cotton. With infinite patience he waits while the merits of each piece are examined and discussed, and if none of his stock proves satisfactory, he is willing to come again with a new set of wares, knowing that in the end purchases will be made sufficient to cover all his trouble. The less aristocratic people are content to go to the stores themselves, and the business streets of a Japanese city, such as the Ginza in Tokyo, are full of women, young and old, as well as merry children, who enjoy the life and bustle of the stores. Like all things else in Japan, shopping takes plenty of time. At Mitsui's, the largest silk store in Tokyo, one will see crowds of clerks sitting upon the matted floors, each with his soroban, or adding machine, by his side, and innumerable small boys who rush to and fro, carrying armfuls of fabrics to the different clerks, or picking up the same fabrics after the customer who has called for them has departed. The store appears, to the foreign eye, to be simply a roofed and matted platform upon which both clerks and customers sit. This platform is screened from the street by dark blue cotton curtains or awnings hung from the low, projecting eaves of the heavy roof. As the customers take their seats either on the edge of the platform or, if they have come on an extended shopping bout, upon the straw mat of the platform itself, a small boy appears with tea for the party. An obsequious clerk greets them with the customary salutations of welcome, pushes the charcoal brazier toward them, that they may smoke or warm their hands on, before proceeding to business, and then waits expectantly for the name of the goods that his customers desire to see. When this is given, the work begins. The little boys are summoned, and are soon sent off to the great fireproof warehouse, which stands with the heavy doors thrown open, on the other side of the platform, away from the street. Through the doorway one can see endless piles of costly stuffs stored safely away, and from these piles the boys select the required fabric, loading themselves down with them so that they can barely stagger under the weights that they carry. As the right goods are not always brought the first time, and as, moreover, there is an endless variety in the colors and patterns in even one kind of silk, there is always plenty of time for watching the busy scene, for sipping tea or smoking a few whiffs from the tiny pipes that so many Japanese, both men and women, carry always with them. When the purchase is at last made, there is still some time to be spent by the customer in waiting until the clerk has made an abstruse calculation upon his soroban. The transaction has been entered into the books of the firm, and a long bill has been written and stamped, and handed to her with the bundle. During her stay in the store, the foreign customer, making her first visit to the place, is frequently startled by loud shouts from the whole staff of clerks and small boys, outcries so sudden, so simultaneous, and so stentorian, that she cannot rid herself of the idea that something terrible is happening every time that they occur. She soon learns, however, that these manifestations of energy are but the way in which the Japanese merchant speeds the departing purchaser, and that the apparently inarticulate shouts are but the formal phrase, "Thanks for your continued favors," which is repeated in loud tone by every employee in the store whenever a customer departs. When she herself is at last ready to leave, a chorus of yells arises, this time for her benefit, and as she skips into the jinrikisha and is whirled away, she hears continued the busy hum of voices, the clattering of sorobans, the thumping of the bare feet of the heavily laden boys, and the shouts of thanks with which the departing guests are honored. There is less pomp and circumstance about the smaller stores, for all the goods are within easy reach, and the shops for household utensils and chinawares seem to have nearly the whole stock in trade piled up in front, or even in the street itself. Many such little places are the homes of the people who keep them. And at the back are rooms which serve for dwelling rooms opening upon well-kept gardens. The whole work of the store is often attended to by the proprietor, assisted by his wife and family, and perhaps one or two apprentices. Each of the workers in turn takes an occasional holiday, for there is no day in the Japanese calendar when the shops are all closed, and even New Year's Day, the great festival of the year, finds most of the stores open. Yet the dwellers in these little homes, living almost in the street, and in the midst of the bustle and crowd and dust of Tokyo, have still time to enjoy their holidays and their little gardens, and have more pleasure and less hard work than those under similar circumstances in our own country. The stranger visiting any of the great Japanese cities is surprised by the lack of large stores and manufactories, and often wonders where the beautiful lacquer work and porcelains are made, and where the gay silks and crepes are woven. There are no large establishments where such things are turned out by wholesale. The delicate vases, the bronzes, and the silks are often made in humblest of homes, the work of one or two laborers with rudest tools. There are no great manufactories to be seen, and the bane of so many cities, the polluting factory smoke, never rises over the cities of Japan. The hard confining factory life, with its never-ceasing roar of machinery, bewildering the minds and intellects of the men who come under its deadening influences, until they become scarcely more than machines themselves, is a thing as yet almost unknown in Japan. The life of the jinrikisha man, even hard and comfortless as it may seem to run all day like a horse through the crowded city streets, is one that keeps him in the fresh air under the open sky, and quickens his powers both of body and mind. To the poor in Japanese cities is never denied the fresh air and sunshine, green trees and grass, and the beautiful parks and gardens are found everywhere, for the enjoyment of even the meanest and lowest. On certain days in the month, in different sections of the city, are held night festivals near temples, and many shopkeepers take the opportunity to erect temporary booths, in which they arrange their wares as to tempt the passers-by, as they go to and fro. Very often there is a magnificent display of young trees, potted plants, and flowers, brought in from the country and ranged on both sides of the street. Here the gardeners make lively sales, as the displays are often fine in themselves, and show to a special advantage in the flaring torchlight. The eager vendors, who do all they can to call the attention of the crowd to their wares, make many good bargains. The purchase requires skill on both sides, for flower men are proverbial in their high charges, asking often 5 and 10 times the real value of a plant, but coming down in price almost immediately on remonstrance. You ask the price of a dwarf wisteria growing in a pot. The man answers at once, $2. $2? You answer in surprise. It is not worth more than 30 or 40 cents. 75 then, he will respond, and thus the buyer and seller approach nearer in price, until the bargain is struck somewhere near the first price offered. Price another plant, and there will be the same process to go over again. But as the evening passes, prices go lower and lower, for the distances that the plants have been brought are great, and the labor of loading up and carrying back the heavy pots is a weary one. And when the last customer has departed, the merchants must work late into the night to get their wares safely home again. But besides the flower shops, there are long rows of booths, which, with the many visitors who throng the streets, make a gay and lively scene. So dense is the crowd that it is with difficulty one can push through on foot or in jinrikisha. The darkness is illuminated by torches, whose weird flames flare and smoke in the wind, and shine down upon the little sheds which line both sides of the road, and continue so tempting a display of cheap toys and trinkets that not only the children, but their elders, are attracted by them. Some of the booths are devoted to dolls, others to toys of various kinds, still others to birds in cages, goldfish in globes, queer chirping insects in wicker baskets, pretty ornaments for the hair, fans, candies, and cakes of all sorts, roasted beans and peanuts, the other things too numerous to mention. The long line of stalls ends with booths or tents in which shows of dancing, jugglery, educated animals, and monstrosities, natural or artificial, may be seen for the moderate admission fee of 2 sen. Each of these shows is well advertised by the beating of drums, by the shouting of doorkeepers, by wonderful pictures on the outside to entice the passer-by, or even by an occasional brief lifting of the curtains which veil the scene from the crowd. without just long enough to afford a tantalizing glimpse of the wonders within. Great is the fascination to the children in all these things, and the little feet are never weary until the last booth is passed, and the quiet of neighboring streets, lighted only by wandering lanterns, strikes the home-returning party by its contrast with the light and noise of the festival. The supposed object of the expedition, the visit to the temple, has occupied but a small share of time and attention, and the little hands are filled with amusing toys and trifles bought, and the little minds with the merry sights seen. Nor are those who remain at home forgotten, but the pleasure-seekers who visit the fair carry away with them little gifts for each member of the family, and the miage or present given on the return is a regular institution of Japanese home life. By 10 o'clock, when the crowds have dispersed and the purchasers have all gone home and gone to bed, the busy booth-keepers take down their stalls, pack up their wares, and disappear, leaving no trace of the night's gaieties to greet the morning sun. End of section 107. This recording is in the public domain.